Hey World History, welcome to Unit 2 of Chapter 20. Today we're going to talk about more revolutions happening in 1830 and in 1848 all across Europe, which is going to lead us into the revolutions that we talk about tomorrow happening in Latin America. So let's jump in. The quick suppression of liberal and nationalist uprisings in the 1820s doesn't end Europe's age of revolution. So just because they spent all that time yesterday stomping out the revolution doesn't mean it actually went away. In 1830 and 1848, Europeans saw street protests explode into full-scale revolts. If you've heard of Les Mis, Les Mis is based off of one of these revolts, which we'll learn about in a few minutes. So when the Congress of Vienna restored Louis XVIII to the French throne, he wisely issued a constitution, because he didn't want everybody to rebel again, and he saw what happened to Louis XVI, and that didn't go so well. He kind of got beheaded. So he issued the Charter of French Liberties. It created a two-house legislature and allowed limited freedom of the press. The king still had a lot of the power, though. And so when Louis XVIII died in 1824, his younger brother, Charles X, inherited the throne. Charles was a very strong believer in absolutism. He was like, I'm going to have all the power. And so he suspended the legislature, limited the right to vote, and restricted the press, all in July of 1830. Liberals and radicals, so a radical is someone who favors extreme change. They respond very, very forcefully to the king's challenge. In Paris, you've got angry citizens. They're throwing up barricades across the streets. From behind them, they're firing on the soldiers with guns. They're pelting them with stones, roof tiles, whatever they have. Within days, the rebels control Paris. A revolutionary tricolor, so remember the blue, white, and red, that's the tricolor, is flying from Notre Dame Cathedral. A frightened Charles X abdicates and flees to England. With the king gone, radicals decided that they wanted to set up a republic. So elected body. Moderate liberals, however, insisted on a constitutional monarchy. Okay, so they're like, no, we can have a constitution, but we still want a monarchy. And so they chose Louis Philippe as king. Louis Philippe is a cousin of Charles X, and as a young man, he had supported the French Revolution of 1789, which is usually known as the French Revolution, the one that we learned about. Okay, so they believed that Louis Philippe. Two P's. Oh, 1 L. Oops. They called him the Citizen King because he owed his throne to the people. So they believed that he would be a better supporter of the people because he owed his throne to the people. Louis got along well with the liberal bourgeoisie. He liked to dress like them. He didn't like to dress like a super rich king. Sometimes he strolled in the streets, shaking hands with people. Politicians fill his government that are all liberal. Under Louis Philippe, the upper bourgeoisie prospered. He does extend suffrage, not to everybody, but to some more upper citizens. The vast majority of the people still can't vote. The king's other policies very much favored the middle class, but they didn't favor the working class. So remember, we've kind of got a four-class structure now. You have your nobility and your wealth. Then you have your middle class. Then you have your working class. Then you have your poor, your peasants. And so a lot of times the working class are the ones getting ignored. And so you still have the spirit of reform, right? So when Metternich said, when France sneezes, Europe catches cold, they basically realized, like, Paris and France are really important. They inspire a lot of places. Most of the uprisings around Europe are suppressed by military force, but some rebels are winning changes. And even when they're failing, the revolutions are starting to really frighten the rulers, and so they're saying maybe we should reform things so that we don't, like, have this happen to us. So Belgium actually wins independence. And here's how. One notable success in 1830 takes place in Belgium. Okay? So in 1815, the Congress of Vienna had... Ooh, that's a really bad glare. Let me see if I can fix that. Does that help a little bit? Maybe? Okay. So the Congress of Vienna had united the Austrian Netherlands, which were Belgium, and the Kingdom of Holland under the Dutch king. Congress wanted to create a strong barrier to help prevent French expansion, and so they thought if they combined everybody together, then they would make a really strong kingdom to stop France from doing anything they weren't supposed to do. The Belgians, though, resented it because the Belgians and the Dutch have different languages. The Belgian economy is based on manufacturing. The Dutch economy is based on trade. And so the Belgians said basically, like, you took away all of our stuff. We're not happy about it. So also the Belgians are Catholic and the Dutch are Protestant. And so really, like, they shouldn't have been a country. So in 1830, news of the Paris uprisings ignites this revolutionary spark in Belgium. Students and workers throw up barricades in Brussels, which is the capital. Britain and France believed that they would benefit from the separation of Belgium, and so they actually support Belgian demands for independence. As a result, in 1831, Belgium became an independent state with a liberal constitution. And nationalists in Poland saw this and said, you know what, we want that too. They also staged an uprising in 1830, but unlike the Belgians, the Poles failed to win independence for their country. In the late 1700s, Russia, Austria, and Prussia had all divvied up Poland. The Poles had hoped that the Congress of Vienna would restore their land to them, but instead the great powers handed most of Poland to Russia. So now Russia controls most of Poland. In 1830, Polish students, army officers, and landowners rose up in revolt. But the rebels didn't really gain any widespread support, and they were actually really brutally crushed by the Russian forces. Some survivors fled to Western Europe and the United States, where they keep alive this kind of dream of freedom. And so Belgium wins independence from the Netherlands. Poland fails to win independence from Russia. And the French, let's get back to them, they revolt in 1848. Alright, so in the 1840s, discontent grows in France yet again. Are we seeing a pattern? Radicals formed secret societies to work for a French republic. Utopian socialists called for an end to the private ownership of property. Even liberals denounced Louis Philippe's government for corruption and wanted more suffrage. So they're saying, like, yeah, we picked this guy, but now he's not doing so good of a job. Near the end of the decade, the discontent is heightened by a recession. Okay? A recession is a temporary or a period of reduced economic activity. So that means that factories shut down, people lose their jobs, poor harvests cause bread prices to rise and people to starve. Newspapers blame government officials for the problems usually, and with conditions a lot like those in 1789, Paris is again ready for revolution. Because in 1789, remember, there was a recession going on. The government wasn't helping any of that. So turmoil spreads during what they called February days. In February of 1848, the government took steps to silence critics, prevent public meetings. They didn't want revolution happening. But of course that doesn't work, and you've got angry crowds on the streets. During the February days, overturned carts, paving stones, toppled trees, anything that they can find were used to block the streets of Paris. Church bells rang alarms. Women and men on the barricades sang La Marseillaise, which is that revolutionary anthem that took hold during the First French Revolution. A number of demonstrators clashed with royal troops and were killed. This is the revolution that Les Mis is about. Okay, as turmoil spread, Louis Philippe abdicates. Okay, so you've got February days. And Louis Philippe abdicates. He's like, nope, I'm done. A group of liberal, radical, and socialist leaders proclaimed the Second Republic, because the First Republic was 1792 to 1804. So now we're on the Second Republic. From the start, though, you've got these deep differences. Middle-class liberals want moderate reforms. Socialists want socialism. And they want to force the government to set up workshops and help for jobs for the unemployed and things like that. Okay? So, let me make this noise stop. Okay, there we go. So the working class loses out during what they call the June days. So by the time we get to June, the upper and middle class are 100% in control of the government. They see the national workshops as a waste of money, and they shut them down. So, but the workers, it's the workers that are still experiencing the problem. The workers are the ones. The middle class is okay. They're, your merchants and your wealthier people, but not the super rich, but the wealthier people. And so, good grief. What is that noise? Sorry, un moment. Okay, there we go. So, okay, so workers are again take the streets of Paris. This time, though, the bourgeoisie liberals are the ones fighting. Not really. Now, yes, they do control the government at this point, but this time it's not your nobles. It's not your king-led army. It's now the upper middle class that's fighting back. The peasants were scared that the socialists were going to take their land, and so they joined the working class in the attack. So you have the peasants and the working class versus the middle and the upper class. At least 1,500 people were killed before the government crushed the rebellion. The fighting of the June days does not leave a good taste in anybody's mouth. The middle class now is scared of and distrusts all the socialists. The working class hates the middle class, the bourgeoisie, and now nobody likes anybody. Okay, so now you're deeply divided. Okay, so a new Napoleon shows up. By the end of 1848, the National Assembly is dominated by members who want to restore order. And so they issue a constitution for the Second Republic. It creates a strong president and a one-house legislature, but it also gives the vote to all adult men, which is the widest suffrage in the world at the time. 9 million Frenchmen could now vote. Before, only 200,000 could. So that's an increase of like 40,000%. Then you have elections for president. And the overwhelming winner, so you have a president, is a guy named Louis Napoleon, who is indeed the nephew of Napoleon. He's the new Napoleon, and he attracts the working class because he says, I care about social issues, I care about poverty. At the same time, his famous name helps remind the people that were a little bit more conservative. They were like, oh, we like Napoleon, he did good stuff for the rich people. Once in office, he started using his position as a stepping stone to greater power, a lot like his uncle. By 1852, he proclaimed himself emperor, taking the title Napoleon III. President Napoleon to emperor. So just like the other Napoleon, he got himself appointed in a democratic way and then took power and made himself supreme ruler. Like his celebrated uncle, he used a plebiscite, that vote, to win public approval. 90% of voters supported his move to set up the empire, the Second Empire. Many thought a monarchy was more stable. They really wanted those glory days back, not remembering all the bad stuff about Napoleon. Napoleon III, like Louis Philippe, ruled at a time of rapid economic growth. So for the bourgeoisie, the early days of the Second Empire brought prosperity. But in time, just like his uncle, he would embark on foreign adventures that would ultimately bring down his empire. So what's happening everywhere else in 1848? In 1830 and in 1789, when the French had revolutions, it sparked the rest of Europe to do so too. In 1848, this happens again. So you've got the people around France are seeing other middle class societies in France with a lot of power. So middle class societies elsewhere are saying, well, we want power too. The working class see the workers have some success in France. They want some of that too. And then nationalists of everybody want to say, we don't want foreign rule. We don't want another country in charge of us. So we start with changes in the Austrian Empire. In the Austrian Empire, you've got revolts that are breaking out in all of the major cities. So even though their ruler Metternich censored the press, books are smuggled to the universities throughout the empire. Students especially are the ones demanding change. When workers joined the students, Metternich actually resigned and fled in disguise. So you've got revolts in Austria, and revolution continues to spread. In Budapest, Hungarian nationalists led by a journalist named Louis Kossuth demanded independence. So Austria, Hungary, Budapest is the capital of Hungary. And in Prague, the Czechs made similar demands. Czechoslovakia. Prague is the capital of the present-day Czech Republic. And overwhelmed by events, the Austrian government agreed to reform because Austria controls all of these places. But the gains were only temporary. Austrian troops soon regained control of Vienna and smashed rebels in Prague and Budapest. So there were only temporary reforms that ultimately failed, at least this time around. Then you have revolts in Italy. Uprisings also erupted in the Italian states. Nationalists wanted to end Habsburg domination because the Habsburgs were still in charge in Italy. From Venice all the way down to Naples, Italians set up all their own individual independent republics. Revolutionaries even expelled the Pope from Rome. They were like, get out. We want a different government. Before too long, though, the forces of reaction surged back there. Austrian troops ousted the new governments, a French army restored the popes, and local rulers canceled the reforms. So they ultimately failed here, too. They set up republics, and then they were destroyed. And then you've got in the German states. Remember, it's not Germany. Not yet. It's just the German states. We're actually about 20 years away from it becoming Germany. In the German states, university students, seeing a trend, demand national unity and liberal reforms. Economic hard times and a potato famine brought a lot of peasants and workers into the struggle. A lot of people were starving. In Prussia, which is one of the German states, the liberals forced King Frederick Wilhelm IV to agree to a constitution. Within a year, though, he dissolved the assembly created by the constitution and returned to absolute power. Throughout 1848, delegates from the German states met in the Frankfurt Assembly. You've got divisions, though, that are emerging over whether or not Germany should be a republic or a monarchy, whether we should include Austria, whether we should join together. Finally, the Assembly offered Prussia's Frederick Wilhelm IV the crown of a united Germany. But he actually says no. And the reason why he says no is because it wasn't offered to him by princes, but it was offered to him by commoners. So he said it was offered from the gutter, and he didn't want to take it. So he turned down being king. And by 1850, rebellion fades, and the age of that liberal revolution really kind of ends. So that liberal revolution had started in 1789 with the first French Revolution, and now by the time we get to 1850, things have kind of settled back down. Why did the uprisings fail? Well, one reason was the rulers' use of military force. Another was that the revolutionaries did not have mass support. And in many instances, the constitutions that represented their principles were very frequently withdrawn, replaced, negated in some way. And then the decades ahead, you've got liberalism, nationalism, and socialism are going to start winning successes, but they're not going to be winning successes through rebellion, but rather through political activity. So this concludes our revolutions in Europe. Tomorrow we will talk about revolutions in Latin America. Okay, so have an awesome rest of your day, and I'll talk to you guys soon. Bye.